However, although Kingston was a very important commercial center, it lacked the banking services that would help to maintain its strong economic growth. In the city in the early 19th century, there was this chronic shortage of cash and problems of cash flow, which was really creating a lot of issues around commerce, around the development, further economic development, for the further economic development and prosperity. So there have been lots of efforts beginning from the 19th century to establish a bank in our city. However, because of several reasons that I'll be talking about during my presentation, all of these efforts failed, which led further frustration, especially among Kingston's merchants groups, who were really keen to find a solution to that problem. And this whole story just led to this interesting episode that we call A Tale of Two Banks. So this is what we will be exploring today. We'll be discussing the events surrounding Kingston's struggle to establish a bank in the early 19th century. And this is a story revealed by a banknote that we found in our museum collections, and a banknote dating back to January 1st, 1820. So this is how we discovered this whole story that I will be sharing with you today. So let's begin. Before beginning my presentation and delving into further history surrounding the banking issues in Kingston, I would like to briefly mention what this program is all about. In 2019 and 2020, at the Murney Tower Museum, we had a very extensive collection digitization project. So during this project, we discovered, we made some interesting discoveries about artifacts in our collection. So these discoveries in turn later on led to the development of this virtual program. So my purpose while developing this program was really to share these discoveries with our audiences, the stories, the themes, the topics, in all these interesting things that exist in our collection. I just wanted to make those discoveries available to people outside of our museum as well. So in the very first session, we explored the people of the Murney Tower, the soldiers who lived in the Murney Tower with their kids and families between 1848 and 1888. So we looked at 19th century daily life in Kingston, especially, of course, in particular in our little Murney Tower. In the second session, we did something almost entirely differently. This time we shifted our focus to art history. We explored a set of three Kingston prints created by British illustrator William Henry Bartlett. So in looking at these Kingston prints, we explored the pictorial and visual depiction of our city as it appeared in the 19th century, as well as we discussed the life and works of our artists. And today in the third session, now I'm taking you to a different journey, this time to the economic history of Kingston. And we'll be talking about this interesting episode, which also reflects broader economic history of Canada as well. Before delving into my story, I would like to take a very brief moment here to take a quick look at Kingston's economic history in the 19th century. And I believe this will really help us to put things into a context. And once I start discussing this interesting episode, then it will make much more sense to us so that we can really understand what led to this interesting incident. So as I already mentioned, Kingston was one of the most, perhaps the most important commercial and economic center of Upper Canada in the early 19th century. Located at the junction of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence, Kingston developed into a major port and commercial center because of its key geopolitical location, as well as because of its role as a point of transshipment for outgoing lumber and wheat and for incoming merchandise and passengers. So this meant that our city in the early 19th century was this very vibrant commercial and economic hub where this constant exchange of goods, services, merchants, passengers, movement of people took place. So as a result, it's not a surprise that in the 19th century, early 19th century, we had this very strong presence of merchant passengers in our city. The merchants who were coming to our city from different parts in Canada or even across the ocean, but also we had this group of merchants, local merchants, who were based in Kingston. They had this strong presence as well. While Kingston was this vibrant cultural economic hub, at the same time, it was experiencing some really serious economic issues. There was this constant lack of capital in the city. So constantly our merchants were experiencing chronic shortages of money. And this was creating really a big challenge for the town's potential for further economic development, as well as for our merchants' daily mercantile activities, simply because faced with these cash flow problems, our merchants had to do all trades still very much based on credit. Therefore, they weren't able to expand their own mercantile activity and even their businesses. So then these merchants in Kingston identified the need for banking services. They thought if Kingston had its own bank based in Kingston, which could issue notes and buy and sell exchanges and give deposit and loans, then this constant lack of capital and cash flow problems and waiting times for the government to issue cash and send it to Kingston would have been resolved. So this whole trade and economic mechanism would have been able to function much more efficiently, and thereby leading to, of course, Kingston's economic development. So this is the background information. This is the contextual information that really surrounds what I'll be discussing in a minute. So now that we have briefly discussed our city's economic history and again the broader historical context in which our artifact was born, now I think I can finally show you our artifact. So this is an 1820 banknote from the Upper Bank of Canada in Kingston, and I will zoom in. I found this artifact in a collection file during our collection digitization project. So the file had the same accession number as our artifact. And I grabbed that file with the pure expectation of, there's some documentation inside, and I will scan those documents and archival documents and hence digitize the archival information. So as I was just looking at the documentation, I discovered the banknote, the actual banknote in the file. And of course, it was a great discovery. And because I knew that I was holding a banknote from early 19th century in my hands. And the very first thing, of course, that caught my eye was what's written on it, right? The Bank of Upper Canada. So soon after, I started looking into the Bank of Upper Canada, just conduct research into this bank in the hopes of learning more about my artifact and what story does it entail? What story does it contain within itself? And then I discovered something that I didn't know before, which I found very interesting. Apparently, in the 19th century, there were two Bank of Upper Canadas in Kingston. One was established by government charter at York, meaning one was established by the government, and it was a legally recognized bank, which opened its doors in York in 1821. And the other one was established in our very own town, Kingston. Before the other bank, it was established in 1819 by a group of independent Kingston merchants, and it was in operation until 1822. What makes the Kingston Bank really interesting is that it was unchartered, meaning it operated illegally without government's permission or without legal recognition. So dated January 1st, 1820, our banknote would have been produced by this latter institution based in Kingston. And this is its connection directly to our city as well. And the whole story that led to the establishment of this bank is really amusing. So now I would like to pose a question. So why did really our Kingston merchants in the 19th century feel the need to establish an unchartered bank in Kingston, right? Like what could have possibly led to this episode in our city's history? And this is why as I told you, the story has been revealed by the artifact itself. I already mentioned some 19th century economic problems, the lack of capital and constant cash flow problems. So our merchants were so frustrated and they just were very keen to find a solution. So starting from as early from 1810, our merchants started to apply to the government for permission to establish a bank in Kingston. The process for this was, of course, more complicated than it is today. Of course, the bureaucracies and everything was taking a very long time. But the initial process, the initial step was to present petition to charter a bank to the provincial legislature. There we go. So they presented bills, made applications one after another, and all of these applications were denied, mostly because of political and financial reasons. So our poor merchants and their applications were refused because there were already plans for establishment of the same bank in a different location. So while our Kingston merchants were trying to establish a Bank of Upper Canada in Kingston, there were another group of merchants who were trying to establish the same bank in New York. And now I would like to draw your attention to the title. I mean, it is not Bank of Kingston, right? Or it is not the Bank of York. So Bank of Upper Canada meant that at that time, this bank would have represented the banking services as well as mercantile activity of the location, of the region. So that's why it was a big deal, really, to establish the Bank of Upper Canada, because the bank, which would have been established legally, would have represented all the banking services of the region, thereby, of course, would gain monopoly over all of these mercantile services and economic activity in the region. And it's a common belief that there were some members of the government at that time who had a vested interest in the establishment of the Bank of Upper Canada in New York. So since those people had interest in that establishment and they were trying to establish same bank at York, they were constantly blocking Kingston's chances of opening a bank. Okay, let's stay here for a second. But finally, it was 1817. Our merchants got lucky. They again applied to the government for a charter to open a bank, and this time their application was approved. So it was in 1817 that the government approved a bill which permitted the establishment of an official, legally recognized bank in Kingston. However, unfortunately, this bill came with two conditions. The first condition was the bill had to obtain one final approval from the colonial office. And second condition was that this whole process of final approval, then preparations for the opening, daily operations, and everything had to be completed by January 1st, 1819. So this whole process actually had a deadline. The colonial office, however, did not give its final approval until May 1819, which was 5 months after the initial deadline had passed. Therefore, our bill had expired and the whole process of waiting application just failed because the bill expired and our merchants were not able to establish their bank any longer. During that 2-year waiting process, some of merchants started to get frustrated again because, of course, the process was taking too long. A group of merchants applied for another charter, but the other ones decided they could not wait any longer. It was enough for them. Frustrated with this delay, they decided to establish their own bank in Kingston, which issued banknotes like just the one shown here, just like the one we have in our collection. So articles of association were drafted in 1818, shares in the new bank were offered for sale, and a board of directors was elected. In 1819, the Bank of Upper Canada finally opened its doors in Kingston. Let's stay here. I will just go back, which I believe will be much better if we saw our perfect banknotes in a bit detail. Despite its official name, however, as the Bank of Upper Canada, our bank operated as a private, unincorporated bank without a charter, meaning again without any legal status or without any legal recognition. However, at first, this didn't seem to pose a big problem. The bank commenced its operations and started to issue banknotes almost immediately. So during its operation, it was in operation until 1822. And during that 4-year period, they issued approximately 19,000 pounds worth of notes. And during this short history, the Bank of Upper Canada in Kingston issued $1, $2, $5, and $10 banknotes. Although at first, not having a charter, thereby not having a legal status, did not seem to pose a problem, later on, things changed. It was around 1820s that cracks began to appear in our bank's operations. There was this constant internal conflict between the president of the bank as well as between the members of the board of directors, which was directly interrupting, of course, daily operations of the museum of the bank. But at the same time, another interesting incident happened. I would like to remind you of our bank's main rival, the Bank of Upper Canada at York. In 1821, our bank's main rival obtained its charter and permission from the government and opened its doors in York as the Bank of Upper Canada with the official and recognized status. So now I would like to very quickly think about the situation. It is 1821. There are two Bank of Upper Canadas in our region. One is based in York, and it has all of this official recognized status because it was opened with government permission. And then there's this other one in Kingston. Although it's older, it is private, it is unincorporated, and it doesn't have a charter. It doesn't have a legal recognition. So it is no surprise that a little bit after, strong criticisms began to be voiced against the Kingston Bank, especially for its credibility and its legitimacy, as well as all of its operations and all of its banking services. And again, very soon after the opening of the other bank in York, our bank was declared illegal and had to close its doors for good in 1822. So what makes this story really interesting, I believe, is it was the failure of our Kingston Bank, together with the failure of all other attempts to really just establish a simple thing as this, establish an official chartered bank in Kingston, eventually led to the approval of this main rival, the Bank of Upper Canada at York, which then, with this opening, also facilitated York's rise as an important economic center, which became a rival to Kingston and even developed further than Kingston in the second part of the 19th century. It was really, I believe, it is really a tale of and the rivalry of two banks. So the Bank of Upper Canada, and you see a drawing here which shows the building, which still exists in Toronto today, by the way. Soon after its opening in 1821, the Bank of Upper Canada at York did an interesting thing. It began to use the term pretended to distinguish itself from the Kingston Bank. So to highlight its position as a legitimate chartered bank and distinguish its name, its operations from the unchartered and legally unrecognized bank in Kingston, this bank in York started using the term pretended Bank of Upper Canada whenever it was referring to the Kingston Bank. What is interesting about this is the term is still very widely and commonly used today. So I researched some articles, research papers, theses, different sorts of academic resources that were written on this episode in Canada's history. And whenever researchers or authors talk about the Kingston Bank, they always use the term the pretended Bank of Upper Canada in Kingston, which personally I found that really interesting. It's term that was and it's very commonly used. As for this bank, as our Bank of Upper Canada, the official Bank of Upper Canada in York, the bank succeeded at first with their legal recognition and charter. They did well in their first 10 years. I can say that they even gained monopoly and they gained further power over banking services, not in the York region, but in the region of Upper Canada. And of course, they also succeeded because the Kingston Bank closed its doors as well. However, it was 20 years after similar internal conflicts began to appear. This bank as well had experienced severe internal conflicts between the president's board of directors, which was, of course, again, interrupting daily operations and the longevity and stability of the bank as well. And it was finally in 1866, the Bank of Upper Canada, the one in York, closed its doors too. The stockholders lost all of their investment of more than $3 million, and over $1 million in taxpayers' money was also lost. So it was a very harsh bankrupt and closure. I believe this brings me to the end of the story, at least for now. But there's one question that I haven't addressed yet or answered. How did we know, right? How can one look at a banknote and identify it or understand if it belongs to the Kingston Bank or to the York Bank? And this is the last part that I will be addressing right now. I will be telling you, if you ever come across a banknote from the Bank of Upper Canada, I will tell you how you can understand if it's a Kingston one or a York one. So just like other banknotes in the early 19th century, the pretended Bank of Upper Canada banknote contains some distinguishing features that really help us identify them. Let's zoom in. The very first one is this engraved view image that you see here. They have really, and when you look at it up close, of course it's a scanned image, and I understand that because of the quality, seeing the line work isn't very easy. However, when you pay close attention, this line work is so detailed and well done that apparently in the 19th century, it was very difficult to reproduce. And at the same time, the Kingston banknotes contains the images of Kingston. That's another very distinguishing feature. This shows Kingston Harbor and waterfront. That also helps us identify them. The third distinguishing feature is this pattern that you see here, this beautiful pattern framing the note. Apparently, this is ornate lettwork patterns. Which is again almost floral motifs, and they really distinguish our banknotes from the other one in York. And I would like to show you one more example, which will, I hope, help us to identify them moving further. This is a banknote from the Bank of Canada collection. It's not, unfortunately, in our collection, but I wanted to show this $10 banknote from the Bank of Upper Canada in Kingston to again show you the very same pattern framing our notes that you can see all around here. And also, I really personally like this banknote as well, simply because here you can see have a very clear view of our lovely city, Kingston. Here on the featured on the cover on the right, we have an engraved view of Kingston Harbor from uphill, and then of course on the very left we have very own Fort Henry, and the whole view of Kingston, which again helps us identify this banknote issued by the Bank of Upper Canada and Kingston at Kingston. I believe that's it. That brings me to the end of my presentation. I really hope you enjoyed it. And personally, we have made lots of curious discoveries, and some of them will be discussed in the coming sessions. But this one in particular had a special importance to me because I absolutely love this story, and I find everything about this really amusing and interesting. And I hope you enjoyed it as well. And thank you.